Before I start this presentation, I would like to thank Professor Jayant Verma because a few years back, I believe he was the one who introduced the idea of using a MIBOR methodology for a WIX kind of estimate. And Ajay and I have further built on this idea, so we would really like to thank him. So what is a volatility index? It's an implied volatility estimate which is derived from options prices. Because it's derived from option prices, it's a forward-looking measure. It captures the market's expectation of future volatility. Now we've seen that in the recent years, WIX has become considerably important and it has several uses, some of which I list here. The first is that because of the forward-looking nature, it has been used in, it is one of the contenders for volatility forecasting, and then it finds application in option pricing and VAR computations. Second is, recently it's also been used as a measure of uncertainty in the economy. So you have a paper by Bloom where they use VIX when examining the effect of macroeconomic shocks in the economy. The third is building trading strategies where you switch positions based on the value of, how the VIX changes. Now, there is a correlation between the changes in VIX and the underlying returns. They are negatively correlated, and it's also often referred to as the fear index because when the VIX rises, people expect the returns to fall. And lastly, there have been in recent years, there have been derivatives introduced on WIX, and the CBOE introduced derivatives in 2004 and 2008. Now, the problem is that each of these applications treat WIX as a hard number, but we all know that VIX is derived from option prices, and these prices are contaminated with error, which gets transmitted to the VIX numbers. So in this paper, we try to introduce a methodology that is going to capture this fuzziness in the VIX estimator. So what do we find? That for a type of volatility index, and I'm going to come back and explain to you what a Vega VIX is, but it's a model-based volatility index, and we find that in our sample, the imprecision is of the magnitude 2.9 percentage points, and it's for a sample of 1 year, and it's for intraday data. Now, a lot of papers in the literature have looked at what are the causes for imprecision, and the approach has primarily been to reduce how can you minimize this imprecision. There hasn't been much work to quantify this, the magnitude of imprecision in a VIX estimator, and this is what we are trying to do in this paper. Now, there are several consequences of having an imprecise VIX. For example, if you have an illiquid asset and and you have options on it and you want to price the illiquid option and to price an illiquid option, one of the parameters is a sigma value, and say you use the VIX as the sigma value. And if you use a point estimate for the VIX number, so say I have an OTM call option on Nifty, and I use the point estimate of VIX, which is 17.82%, then the option is priced at rupees 1.92. However, the minute I incorporate this uncertainty in VIX, the option price may lie anywhere between 0.89 and 3.86. So this interval is huge. So this is the consequence of having an imprecise VIX estimate. The other consequences are that if you're calculating VAR based on VIX, then there is imprecision that gets transmitted to VAR estimates. And lastly, when you have derivatives priced on a fuzzy estimate, then what is it that you can draw out of these derivatives? They are priced on a fuzzy underlying. So that in itself creates uncertainty in the pricing of the derivatives. Now, so to summarize what we are trying to do in this paper, we are trying to compute imprecision for model-based VIXs. So here, the volatility index is derived from implied volatility estimates, which are computed through a formula like the Black-Scholes formula or the binomial tree and so on and so forth. And we use the bootstrapping sampling procedure to estimate these imprecision indicators. And this is what we find. So we take a sample of SPX, S&P 500 index options for a given time and for two maturities, that is 29 and 64 days. And this is what we find for the VIX estimator. Similarly, when we do it for Nifty, we find that the confidence band is even wider because Nifty is definitely more illiquid than the S&P 500 options. And lastly, we use this imprecision as a model selection criteria. So say you have 5, 6 volatility indexes and you were to choose one of them. So you would like to choose an estimator which is more precise. And lastly, so this is the outline of the presentation. First, I'm going to discuss, what are the sources of errors in a VIX estimator, then how do we measure this imprecision, and so on and so forth. So let's start. So the first is, there are two ways to compute a volatility index. The first is the model-based volatility index, which is you use a Black-Scholes model, compute the implied volatilities from your option prices, and you have a series of implied volatilities. You apply some kind of weighting scheme, and you get an aggregate statistic for the implied volatility estimate. That's the model-based approach. Second is the model-free approach, which is the methodology that has been adopted by CBOE, and in that it's a model-free strategy where so the formula for the VIX is derived by pricing a variance swap, and that is used to compute the VIX estimator. Now, each of these methodologies have errors embedded in them. There are different sources of errors for each of these methodologies. The limited point that we are trying to make is that no matter which methodology you adopt, there is a degree of measurement error that is induced in the estimation process. Now, how do we measure the imprecision of a volatility index? To measure the imprecision of a VIX, we take a simple example, and the example is of a Vega-weighted volatility index. So the Vega of an option is the sensitivity of an option to its volatility. So higher is the sensitivity of the option to the volatility, the more weight you're going to give to a VIX number in calculating the average statistic. So let's see how it's computed. So what we do is we take, so you have a chain of option prices at any given time, and you have these chain of option prices for two maturities, the first month maturity and the second month maturity. Now for each of these option prices, you calculate an implied volatility number, and at every given maturity, you calculate an average implied volatility where you use the Vega weights to compute the average implied volatility. So this is a direct weighting scheme where higher weight would be the higher weight would be given to options which have higher Vega. And then you interpolate. So we have a series of option prices for first month maturity, for second month maturity. Hence, we have implied volatilities for first month maturity and for second month maturity. We have an average statistic for first month maturity, for second month maturity. We interpolate the two because one is for less than 30 days, one is for greater than 30 days, and VIX is a 30-day implied volatility estimate. So we interpolate the two and get the 30-day implied volatility estimate. So now we have a final VIX number, and here it's the Vega-weighted VIX. So now, why do we use a bootstrap inference? Now you can draw a parallel, and why we use a bootstrap inference procedure here, because it's similar to computing a LIBOR. So the problem in computing a LIBOR is that the true price is not known, and the prices that are polled by the different dealers are noisy estimates, and these noisy estimates are pooled in together using a bootstrap inference procedure to compute the robust LIBOR number. So similar to that, we use this methodology to compute the bootstrapping distribution of the VIX estimator. So what are the steps involved? So at any given time, we have a sample of option prices. So you have a chain of option prices, and the option prices are for two maturities, the first month maturity and second month maturity. So how do you differentiate between the options? So you have options on different strikes and two different maturities. So now for every option in your sample, you compute an implied volatility estimate. Then at every maturity, now you have a sample of implied volatility numbers, and we sample with replacement from these implied volatility numbers to create one bootstrap replicate. So now what we have is two bootstrap data sets, one for each maturity. Now, and we use each bootstrap data set to compute the average implied volatility number. So if I go back to my previous slide, so the average weighted IV for each maturity I. So this is the summary that I'm computing from my bootstrap data set. So for bootstrap data set 1, I have an IV1. For bootstrap data set 2, I have an IV2. And I repeat steps 3 to 5 1,000 times, and I have the bootstrap distribution of the Wix estimator. Now I use this bootstrap distribution A to compute the standard deviation, and second, the confidence band. So now I have derived my imprecision indicators from the from the bootstrap distribution of the Wix estimator. Now, this is the data that we use. So we compute these imprecision indicators for S&P 500 options for a month of data, and we compute the imprecision indicators for Nifty for a year of data, and these are the parameters to compute implied volatilities for options. So you have your expiry, strike, what type of option it is, and the maturity, and then the bid and the ask prices. For the risk-free rate, we use, for NSE, we use the MIBOR rates, and for the US, we use the treasury bill rates. Now, this is just, so when you have a series of option prices, and you have, say, tick-by-tick data, so this is a technique to compute data set every 15 seconds. So at any given point, if an option is missing, you go back to the last 5 minutes and you pick up that option. So so if an option is not traded in a given interval, we take the option that has been traded in the last 5 minutes. So this is a sampling procedure just to create the intraday data set. Now we come to two examples. Now just to fix intuition, let's take a simple case where we are just looking at the money options, and we are in the where we assume that there is normality, and we have the implied volatility numbers for the ATM calls and puts, and this is for a sample of S&P 500 options. And we calculate a sample mean, and this is the and we use the simple formula when we compute a 95% CI using a normal distribution, and this is the confidence interval that we get. Now, even in the simple case, we can see that the imprecision is not small. The confidence interval is not small. Now, let's go to our bootstrapping technique. So what we have here is a sample of S&P 500 options, and we have it for two maturities with 29 and 64 days of expiry. And we have calls and puts, and this is the actual data. Now we use this data, so it's basically the last column, which is the implied vols that you are sampling, and we do it separately for the first month maturity and the second month maturity. I'm just showing the two data sets together. And this is the bootstrap replicate that you get. Now this is one replicate. Now we do this 1,000 times, and this is the distribution of Wix that you get. So on September 17th, the Vega Wix estimator on the S&P 500 index was 21.53%, and the width of the CI was around 1.5 percentage points. And we say that this number is economically significant because we see that the one-day change in Wix is smaller than this number on 62% of the days. So this is a big number. Now let's do the same exercise for a Nifty sample, and here we find that the confidence bands are even wider, and that's what we expect because the Nifty index options are less liquid than the S&P 500 index options, and there are fewer strikes available when you have the Nifty index options. So all these make Nifty index market a little less liquid than the S&P 500 index options, and you expect a wider confidence band. Now, we use the imprecision criteria to do model selection. First, we use so we calculate, the imprecision indicators for a large sample of Nifty index options, and we see that in the median case, it is 2.9 percentage points, and this again is a large significant number because it is larger than one-day change in VIX in the sample, which is of 1.18 percentage points. Now, we come to using the imprecision for model selection. There are different alternates to computing the model-based VIXs, and this is something that Susan and I had discussed in a paper before this, and in that we come up with different ways to weight the implied volatilities, and one of them is using the liquidity of the options market, one is elasticity, and the other is Vega. So these are all alternatives to the model-based volatility index approach. Now, one way to look at choosing a good estimator has been that if it is a good forecast of volatility, so you compare it against a benchmark, run a horse race, and you choose which volatility index you're going to pick up. But this could be an addition to the forecasting application, or it could be an independent test, because you want an estimator which is more precise, which has a smaller sigma and confidence band. So a lot of times when you are doing forecasting, it so happens that you have two estimators which have equal predictive ability. So in that case also you could choose one which has a higher precision. So we have three types of volatility indexes, and under the liquidity indexes, we have the spread adjusted VIX and the traded volume adjusted VIX. So there are two liquidity weights that we are using. The traded volume is just a direct measure. So you are saying that if an option is heavily traded, you're going to give it a higher weight. The second is spreads, so you're going to give higher weights to options which have lower spreads because they are more liquid. So these are the two liquidity adjusted VIXs. Vega and elasticity have already been used a couple of times in the literature, but not in the context of computing a VIX number, but just coming up with an average implied volatility number to deal with problems of imprecision in a single implied volatility number. So the period of analysis is 2009 to 2010, and we pick up 4 snapshots a day to compute the VIX numbers and the imprecision indicators. We take 3 sampling frequencies. So the standard is the CBOE VIX uses the 15-second frequency as the standard intraday value, and here we play around with the sampling frequency, but we see that our results are robust. So what we do is we compute our imprecision indicators and we compare them across the different models. We use a pairwise Wilcoxon sign test, and we find that the Vega weighted VIX has the highest precision, and the median CI width is around 2.9 percentage points, and the standard deviation of the sample of the bootstrap samples is 0.73 percentage points. Here we just present results for 15 seconds, but the results are robust to 30 and 60 seconds. So if you look at the median value, you see that the Vega weighted VIX has the lowest median value of 2.9 percentage points. Then we have the SVIX and the two liquidity measures, which are close to each other at 3.54 and 3.41, but when you look at the elasticity weighted VIX, you can see that the difference is huge. It's almost double of what you see in the liquidity weighted VIXs. Yeah, okay. Now we use the sign test, and this is what we find, that the Vega weighted VIX is the VIX estimator with the highest precision. Then we have the liquidity adjusted VIXs, both are equally precise, and lastly we have the elasticity weighted VIX. Now this is something that we propose to, how would you use this imprecision indicator? So this is just another application for the imprecision indicator. So now if you were in the Black-Scholes world, an investor does not face uncertainty, he only faces risk. But if you move away from the Black-Scholes world, you have risk and uncertainty that an investor has to face. Now, this is often known to us as the Knightian uncertainty. Now, there are several papers that that have been developed in the theoretical space to model the Knightian uncertainty, but recently a number of empirical proxies have come up to measure the uncertainty. Some of them include, for example, Brenner and Isaacian use what is the probability of loss or gain. So they use their returns and calculate the probability of gain and loss, calculate the variance of that, and say that this is your measure of uncertainty. Then there is a second paper where they use the volatility of the implied volatility estimate as a measure of uncertainty. And lastly, we have a paper which uses the implied probability distributions to compute the measures of ambiguity. Now, why we say that VIX could, so we know that measurement errors in VIX make it an imprecise estimator. This imprecision in estimator could actually may be capturing uncertainty in the environment. And the other reason why VIX would be a better estimate is that it is forward-looking, so it actually captures the expectation of the investor in the market. So it may provide useful insights if it is used as an ambiguity measure. This is something that we would like to test in our future work. And there is an iFrog's package that is available with the methods of this paper, so you can replicate the results of this paper using the iFrog's package. And to conclude, so Henschel 2003 used a theoretical confidence band approach and compute the confidence interval for the model-based volatility index VXO. Now, when they calculate the confidence band, so it's a theoretical band, they take one sample of option and they calculate this confidence band number. When they do so, they make assumptions about the errors. So they say that the errors are normally distributed and they set the mean and the variance parameter. And they find that if you take a single implied volatility estimate, then the imprecision is high and it's order of plus minus 6 percentage points. But if you were to take the VXO, the model-based volatility index, the imprecision is just around plus minus 25 basis points. So their idea is that because you're averaging out, most of the errors will average out, and this number would be more precise than the single implied volatility estimate. But our result substantially disagrees from his, and a few reasons are, so we use a model-free strategy to gauge the level of imprecision in an implied volatility estimate. So we are not deriving theoretical bands, and we are not making any assumptions about the distribution of the error. Two, we are doing it for a large sample of options. So we have around 1,500 data points at any given point in time, and we are using all this data to compute the imprecision indicators. And lastly, we are computing it for a VIX that has a wider applicability than the VXO, because you use a large range of strike prices. So you just don't pick up, and in recent years, the OTM options have become extremely important, and they are used by institutional investors to hedge their portfolio. So the liquidity does pick up in the OTM options in terms of traded volume. So we say that instead of just picking up the 4 ATM options, why don't we take the entire range of options, but we pick up, so we weight these options depending on a certain criteria. So it is not the old CBOE VIX. And we find that irrespective whether you use an S&P 500 sample or you use the Nifty sample, the imprecision is significant. And we use the imprecision indicators for model selection. And among the different volatility indexes, we find that the Vega-weighted VIX has the highest precision. And for future work, we intend to use these imprecision indicators to measure ambiguity. Then you go back to your asset pricing framework, you have your Pharma French model, you add ambiguity as another pricing factor, and you assess the relationship between ambiguity and expected stock returns. So that would be one approach, and the other is to come up with inference procedures for the model-free volatility index, that is the CBOE VIX. Thank you.
Yeah, at the outset, I would like to uh, thank Rohini for acknowledging uh, my suggestion, which I don't remember having made. And the only consolation is that in all of this, caveat emptor applies, so that you can say whatever you like, and it is up to the recipients to figure out whether what one is saying is sensible or not. Because otherwise, one has to be very careful about every casual remark that one makes. Okay, I think the key conclusion here is that VIX is not a hard number, and I think this is a very important thing which needs to be understood. It has a lot of implications. It's very valuable, and I was looking back, if you look at something like VIX, I think there is an analogy between what Wall Street does and what econometricians do. Wall Street will put a derivative on a derivative on a derivative. So if you look at something like VIX futures, you say, okay, its underlying is VIX. What is that? That is a derivative of an index. What is the index? That is a computed thing from a basket of stocks. And econometricians are making estimates of estimates of estimates, and at some point you don't know what is going on. So the whole structure is a little shaky, and it's useful to keep this in mind when you look at some extremely derived quantities that we are very, very far removed from the underlying prices, which are sort of objective data. I was also reminded of this fascinating book that Oscar Morgenstern wrote half a century ago on the accuracy of economic observations. And that is a very nice quote from Norbert Wiener, that economics is a 1 or 2 digit science. And that's really the conclusion here as well. So when you say that the VIX is 13.65%, what you're saying, first digit is fine. I know that it is 10, it's not 20. Second digit may be 13, maybe 12, 14, but it is okay, reasonable. But remaining digits are all noise. Okay? And that's true. If you look at GDP, if somebody tells you the GDP of this country is 3,141 billion, you say, yeah, 3 trillion is fine. It's not likely to be 2 or 4. 3.1 maybe. Everything else is noise. And I think this is very, very important. And it's a good reminder that this is what we're talking about. Okay. Now, you have this problem of how to optimally aggregate noisy indicators. And if you go back to first principles on this, if you go back to first principles on this, what does theory say? Theory says that the way to aggregate noisy indicators is to weight each instrument in proportion to its precision, or the inverse of the variance. This is the standard aggregation process. So if it looks very abstract, but this is stuff that we have done even in high school. Suppose I tell you that one guy took a sample of 25 and the sample mean was 8. Another guy took a sample of 75 and the sample mean was 10. Now, how do you aggregate the two? The way you aggregate it is, let's imagine that the whole thing was one big sample of 100. And what would be the sample mean of that 100? The answer is 25 times 8 plus 75 times 10. You add that up, that's 950 divided by 100, it's 9.5. So one sample is weighted with 25, one sample is weighted with 75. In statistics theory, what are these? You know that the standard error of the sample mean is sigma by root n. So the variance is sigma squared by n. So when you weight by n, you're weighting by the reciprocal of the variance. This is stuff that we have done even in high school. Now, then the question would be, yeah, of course, if you're a Bayesian, then you would add prior weights and so on. Now, if you look at what this paper is doing, you're really taking, implicitly, you're taking equal weights, because the only weight that they're using is the weights that are used even with people who do not have any belief about imprecision in the estimates. So let's look at what would happen if you tried to use the precision idea a little carefully. If I assume that the option price has a standard error of sigma epsilon, what would be the error in the option volatility? And that would be sigma epsilon by vega, because one unit change in the standard deviation moves the price by vega. So you would get this kind of a thing, sigma e by epsilon. If you use precision-based estimates, therefore, you should weight the implied walls by Vega squared. Okay? So that's what you should be doing. And that assumes that sigma error is the same for all options. Normally, one would think that sigma error should be lower for the liquid options. Liquid options tend to be close to the money and therefore have high Vega. And if you take that into account, maybe you should be weighting with Vega cube or something. Vega squared for the precision and another Vega for the uncertainty about the price itself. And in this light, what I think is coming out when they say that VWIX is performing better is that weighting with Vega is better than weighting with something else, because you need to weight with some function of Vega, and that is what is coming out. So that leads to the question that if you did Vega squared or Vega cube, will you get even more precise estimates? And those who did not have noisy prices would never have thought about it. If you didn't think about noisy prices, you wouldn't think of Vega skewed, Vega cube. You would be laughed out of court if you did that. But if you say prices are noisy, maybe you should be doing this. Okay, that's one. The second question is that when you do this bootstrap, what is the optimal sampling for the bootstrap? And how do you justify the bootstrap standard error as a measure of ambiguity or uncertainty about this? The way I think about it, I don't know whether you have a different way of thinking about it. The way I think about it is that there are hundreds of strikes, not all of them trade on any day. So any day when I look at it, the prices that I see are a sample from a very large population of potentially tradable options. And then I say it is pure chance that I happened to observe this particular sample of traded options. And therefore, it's equally likely that it was a different sample that got traded. And then if I do a bootstrap, then I'm really saying what happened if I had observed a slightly different sample, and it comes out as that. Fine. So that's the way, yes, it does therefore measure my subjective uncertainty about it. But there is a problem. The problem is that then you can't really be doing uniform sampling, because if you look at the most liquid options, I would say that in any plausible sample, those prices should be there. And it is the less liquid options that should be being knocked out in the bootstrap. So I would argue that you should sample with a probability which is proportional to the trading frequency, or even better, it should be inversely proportional to the intra-trade time. So if you put in an exponential distribution for intra-trade times and you weight with that, then probably you will be closer to this, and then maybe the confidence interval will shrink as a more plausible estimate of what's the real uncertainty in this. One issue here which I'm not in agreement with is this statement that because the error imprecision is 1.5%, and on most days the VIX moves less than that, on most days we really don't know whether the VIX moved up or down. Now, my point is that that doesn't necessarily follow. And let me give you a contrived counterexample that let's say there are 10 options that are observed on both dates. And on each of those 10 options, the VIX on the IV on the second day is higher, maybe 0.1, 0.3, 0.4, and so on. You average all that, the VVIX is higher by 1%, and that's less than the imprecision of 1.5%, and you say, I don't know whether VIX actually went up. But if I simply used a binomial test and said there were 10 options, on all of them the second day is higher, 2 power 10 is about 1,000, I have 99.9% confidence that VIX is actually higher on the second day. And again, going back to Oscar Morgenstern, he has a whole discussion on this, and the key point is that if you want to know what is the imprecision of the first difference of a series, it is not enough to know what is the variance of the error. It's equally important to know what is the autocorrelation of the error, because standard statistics will tell you variance of A minus B is variance of A plus variance of B minus twice covariance AB. Unless you know what that covariance term is, you don't know what it is. And if the errors are highly correlated over time, the first difference might be very, very accurate, even if the level, there is a lot of uncertainty. This is something that I need to look at. And yeah, I agree with this idea that if you want to know what is the best VIX estimator, just looking at how they forecast realized variance is not a very good way of going about it. And I entirely think that we need to look at other ways. In fact, I tend to think that the way VIX is being applied today, VIX is not being applied as a measure of risk, it is being applied as a measure of risk aversion. It is not being applied as a measure of variance, it's being applied as a measure of tail risk. And then ability to forecast realized variance is a very poor criteria for a good VIX. And in fact, it is precisely because it is a risk aversion tail risk that it works for currency markets, for sudden stops, it works for all kinds of assets. Whether the carry trade collapses is dependent on VIX and so on. So if you ask me what are the best VIX, I would say that they, I don't think it's econometrically practical to do it, but if you ask me to do it, I would say that it should be the one which is closest correlated to the first principal component of a basket of tail risk indicators, because that's what really we are trying to measure. And it's possible that the imprecision is one among them. One thing I haven't put here, I'm not very, of course it was there probably in the further work and so on. This whole thing is ignoring the smile. Yeah, and one of the things that I worry about is that if you adjust for the smile, and one of the things in the, when you distinguish from that 2003 paper is they're very careful to get rid of the smile by focusing very close to the strike. And therefore that model is relatively immune to smile. So how much is this due to the smile, and how much is this really talking about the slope and curvature of the smile rather than this? That I'm not very sure. Okay, that's, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Verma. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open for a few questions, and then Rohini and Ajay can take all the questions together. Any questions?
Rohini, I had one question.
Sure.
Did you explore Kalman filter in this here?
No, we haven't.
Do you think it's possible to
Filter out the noise and...
right? I mean,
yeah.
the sense that the Kalman filter is a good sort of filter to the situation which actually you're mentioning. So I think one can easily explore Kalman filter and extended Kalman filter, which actually are proven sort of estimators and optimal estimators. So one can really explore that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good. Any more questions? All right. Ajay and Rohini?
So I want to take a stab at some of the things that Jayant Verma said. The first is that on the smile, I think the smile is actually the source of the imprecision. Implicit in the idea of a VIX that is computed from many, many options is the idea that there is only one VIX. But the very existence of the smile as a robust fact of all markets is teaching us that, actually you live in a bit of a non-Black-Scholes world. So there is a contradiction there, that we live in a non-Black-Scholes world, but we go ahead with using a notion like VIX where there is only one volatility. We are pretending that all the options are equally informative about that. So I think that it is the smile that is the source of some of the variation that is being picked up, some of the variability of the VIX estimator that is being picked up by our estimator. My second comment is,
if you look at the new CBOE VIX, that's just modeling the variance of the risk neutral distribution. It's not estimating a Black-Scholes parameter at all. It's just saying, forget about all that. Let's just talk about what is the variance going to be, variance of the distribution. And you're using model-free estimate of that. So you're not in a Black-Scholes.
yeah, we have been struggling on how to take this kind of idea to the new VIX and have not as yet succeeded. So far we have it working for the old VIX. My second comment is on what you said about the observation frequency. I think that microstructure facts, such as the ATM option trades more, some options trade less, are the real world noise we are trying to get out of. Okay, so in my dream world, all products trade infinitely, frequently, and have very, very tight spreads. Okay, that's the dream world we live in. Now in the real world, there are these variations. So there's a bit of a spread, something trades often, something trades less often. but that's what we want to get out of. So we should not respect the facts of that world in understanding the sampling distribution. It is a misfeature of the world that a certain option trades less frequently. So the bootstrap that you want to construct as a description of the variability in this estimate should reflect that uncertainty. And by the way, you said that the ATM options are very precise and the others are not. In the bootstrap scheme that we use, we are sampling from the bid and the ask. So some of that fluctuation is coming into our notion of sampling variation. Rohini, you want to say some stuff?
I agree.
That's it? That's wonderful. I had one question on Rohini on pricing of variance swaps, which are used as an alternative to the. I mean, I have been part of an entity which actually traded variance swaps quite a bit, and it's again, you have all the problems that you have in the options world, in variance swaps world as well. It's an over-the-counter product. Liquidity is largely focused on a few swaps of a few types of swaps. So how does that actually help overcome the limitations of these options?
So they just use the variance swap to come up with a formula for the CBOE VIX. So what they do is that they use the OTM options. So you have like they have around 50-60 OTM options on the S&P 500 VIX, and they directly use the option prices and they compute the CBOE VIX. So it's like a formula that they derive by valuing the variance swap. So it's not exactly using the
But
variance.
it is still based out of the option pricing, right?
Yes,
So
it-
essentially there is, okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we will move to
the stuff. How would the bid-ask spread of a variance swap compare with this imprecision estimator? Because the guy who's trading it is somehow the bid-ask spread is putting a bound on that. Is that anywhere like this 1.5%?
Some variance swaps are traded very liquid swaps. I mean, there's a whole lot of hedge funds who participate in it. But typically the market is over the counter, so there's no way for us to know, unlike an options market where it's easy for us to figure out what the true market is. So for example, we have heard cases where I used to be with Goldman. So Goldman used to get quite a bit of aggressive pricing on variance swaps, while some other people like Citibank used to complain that they never got the same deal. Things like that. So I can't really answer your question, but my guess is that a lot of imprecisions or as Ajay was saying, in terms of things that are going on in the options market, the frictions caused in the real market is actually happening in variance swaps market as well. In fact, yeah, so I don't know whether you would really solve the problem by doing it in a different way through those same instruments.
When you sample out of like bid and ask spread, bid and ask prices, won't that sort of influence or sort of bias your estimation of volatility anyway because of the bid-ask bounce, just because the prices move up and down by itself?
And that is precisely the point. So hypothetically, there is a world.
Right.
Nothing has changed in your world, but one trade took place at the bid or one trade took place at the ask. Now your apparent VIX changes, and that is the point. That is the point of our paper, that there is microstructure noise in the data, in the raw material that is being used to compute the VIX. And we wish to create an inference procedure so that all of us can be more skeptical in how we use VIX and actually have a sense of how much imprecision is there surrounding it. So that's precisely the point of this paper, that we set up a bootstrap estimator of the imprecision of VIX, whereas today all of us are using VIX as a hard number.
And that's close to real world, right?
Yeah, so we think so.